Harvard Seminary. And in some 14 years ago now, I think, or 13 years ago, he came up with this brilliant idea that we need an Islamic seminary, a seminary that speaks to Islam, that is situated in an Islamic context, because we do have seminaries. So he founded the he's founder of the Islamic Seminary Foundation, that over time became the Islamic Seminary of America, and has been now operating as a full-fledged seminary. We had our first graduation ceremony last year and graduated 6 students. You will hear all about that later on. But that said, I'll give the floor to Dr. Jimmy Jones, but before that, I'd like to invite the chair of the board to make some remarks, if you will, please.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. When I heard Islamic Seminary of America, I was so proud. We have always been depending on Methodist Seminary, Baptist Seminary, sending our students there. They would have special Islamic classes there. We needed our own. And thank you very much for starting it. On behalf of Muslim Community Center, I welcome you all. And I have a request. See the chairs and how many are empty? Tell your friends to come and fill them up next time. We will bring Dr. Jones back. We will bring Dr. Yunus back. And we need to do this more and more and educate our people, pick the brains of our leaders. This kind of program was started by a long time ago. We used to meet in what is called library now. Then we started meeting here. Then came along Farhana and she changed the title. We used to call it adult lectures. Farhana changed it Community Education Series, and it has been that ever since. Thank you very much. Yes.
That was actually a sponsor.
Okay. But it was under your leadership.
I agree.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yunus. I'm done.
And we have another speaker from the host community, the president.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you again to our distinguished guests. My apologies that I'm not dressed for the occasion. I just came from another event, so I didn't have time to change. But I'd like to welcome Dr. Jimmy Jones, Dr. Iqbal Yunus, and I'd like to just say something. I'm not going to speak too much. I want to just make one comment. So I was blessed enough growing up in a generation in which we had like pioneers, deep thinkers, scholars, right? Dr. Yunus is actually one of them. He's really well versed in Islamic finance. And we were exposed to really deep thinking. I don't want to say like the new generation is not lucky like me, but they're not, because there's more edutainment. I think tonight you're really going to see and hear deep thoughts, really good, substantive comments. So please pay attention and really be grateful that we do have someone like Dr. Jimmy Jones that's here. And thank you so much again for coming. And welcome everybody to MCC.
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalat, wassalam ala rasulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, kathiran. After praising Allah and sending blessings on His beloved Prophet Muhammad, alayhi salat wassalam, I am thankful and grateful to be in your presence tonight. I took Shahada in 1979. I would never have imagined that I would be part of the starting of an institution that was about the training of Muslim leadership. I'm humbled by being with you, and so inshallah we'll give you some idea of what we're trying to do at the Islamic Seminary of America. And I want to tell you, the watermelon was worth the trip. Because it's hard to get good watermelon up north where I come from, but to come further south, alhamdulillah. So somebody saved me some for the end, inshallah. So what I want to talk about is navigating Muslim American cultures and identities in a divisive world. But I want to give you a flavor of what we in fact do at the Islamic Seminary of America. We try to do three things in class. I, as the executive vice president, I'm probably the person who's seen the beginning of almost every class since 2019. The first thing we try to do is to make some assertions that might challenge what the students already think. Sorry. The second thing, we try to give them some reading, some books that will give them a background on the ideas that we present. The third thing we try to do is have conversations that are critically reflective. And so I want to give you an idea of how we teach using this idea of navigating Muslim American cultures and identities in a divisive world. I want to start off with a few basic assertions. Number one, if you think of biology and Islamic thought, there's no such thing as race. If you think of biology and Islamic thought, there is no such thing as race. Biology first. There's this guy named Richard Dawkins. How many of you have heard of Richard Dawkins? Yes. He's a rabid, anti-religious, new atheist, right? But one thing that Richard Dawkins and we agree on is that everybody in this room is related. Think about it. One thing that we Muslims and somebody, an atheist who he calls himself a Darwinian biologist, we agree on, is that everybody in this room is related. We said everybody's Bani Adam, alhamdulillah. And if you read Dawkins' book, The River Out of Egypt, he'll say that every human being walking on the face of the earth today has one common ancestor. So we agree on that. We don't agree on much else, but we agree on that. And so in that sense, there's no such thing as race. If you look at the Quran, particularly at Surah An-Nisa, Ya ayyuhan nas ittaqu rabbakum alladhi khalaqakum min nafsin wahida. Well, that's the end of the argument here. O humanity, right? This is directed at humanity rather than Ya ayyuhalladhina aminu. O humanity, be conscious of your Lord, right? Why should you be conscious of your Lord? Because your Lord created you. And why should you be conscious of your Lord? Because your Lord created you from nafsin wahida. End of argument, right? We're all related, but we talk as if, we Muslims, and the broader community talks as if, everybody else, as if there's something essentially as race, right? The second thing is that race, and you may have heard this in college, race is a social construct. And so I'm going to give you some books because I'm a bibliophile. I love books. I'm a professor. And so what we do in our classes, we try to give people places to go to dig deeper. So a book I would recommend on this, there are lots of books on this, is Whiteness of a Different Color. Whiteness of a Different Color by a guy named Matthew Fry Jacobson. And he in this book, he says in the preface that race is a biological fiction, right? It's a biological fiction because there's nothing in biology, as we said before, that ties people who look like me together. Probably there's more, and some of you know this better because they're doctors, I know in here, people take biology, know better than I, that people who look like, actually, when you look at their genes, they're not alike. And so, but for the Muslim, we understand these two things. And so if you look at the second point, that race is a social construct, so for instance, When the Irish first came to the United States of America, they were not white. We think of Irish people as white. When the Italians first came to the United States of America, they were not white, right? And so race is a social construct, which means, and the third point is that in spite of these first two things, in spite of the idea that race, that the biologists and the Muslims agree there's no such thing as race, and the fact that race is a social construct, we live in a racialized and gendered society. We in the United States of America, more than ever, with the current presidential debates and talk going on, we live in a racialized and gendered society. What do I mean? We live in society is that how you're dealt with is often based on what race you're perceived as, right? Because sometimes they get it wrong, right? Sometimes they get it wrong. And what gender, because now they have multiple genders, what gender you're perceived as. And this is the kind of society that we have in the home of the free in the land of the brave. So those are preliminary things that I wanted to say. So let's get to the PowerPoint. So what I want to do is go through this talk by talking about 3 events that will illuminate how I would suggest that we handle the issue of race as an identity as a Muslim community. On April 14, 1997, I was working at Manhattanville University, where I'd been for about 30 years as a full professor in African studies and world religions. I got a call that many black parents in the United States of America fear. I got a call from my oldest son on that day telling me that my youngest son, Malik, did not make it. He was killed by a police officer at the end of a traffic stop. And I was outraged because here was a situation where it was a traffic stop. He ran away from the police officer, which I never taught him to do, but the police officer ended up shooting him. I won't go into the grisly details, but the police officer ended up shooting my son 7 or 8 times at point blank range. So I was angry. I was enraged. I'm a person who grew up in the segregated South, in Virginia, in Roanoke, Virginia. There was white and colored water. You go downtown, you couldn't eat at the lunch counters downtown. There were segregated schools. It was illegal in the state of Virginia for white and blacks to marry when I was growing up. And so all of this welled up in me, right? So what does this have to do with Muslim identity? MashaAllah, I'm a Muslim. I took Shahada, alhamdulillah, in 1979. MashaAllah, changed my life, blessed my life, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. And so I had been teaching from 1980 up until COVID. I've been a volunteer teacher in the prison system. And I just taught a hadith, this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, the real patience is at the first stroke of a calamity. SubhanAllah. You don't know whether or not you're patient, Muslim, unless tough times come along. Yeah, you can be patient with some other things, standing in line, waiting in line at the checkout counter, right? You can be patient, waiting for your automobile to get there, waiting for the bus to come. But real patience is when some kind of calamity strikes you and turns your life upside down. Malik was my baby boy. I loved him dearly. And I felt that he had been taken away from me by unconscious, implicit bias that permeates this society even up until now. This is 27 years ago, right, that this happened. And still we have George Floyd Still, we had a woman who called the police herself, and she was shot a couple of weeks ago. It hurts my heart. And people in New Haven are organizing to name the corner where Malik was shot, Malik Jones Way. But it's a shame that after all these years, we're still dealing with the same thing. So 2 points as Muslims. Number one, when you face a calamity, I suggest that you really, really put your Islam to work. That's what I tell my children and my grandchildren. Alhamdulillah, most of the people here probably come and pray in Jama'ah on a regular basis. Alhamdulillah, they come to Jummah on a regular basis. Alhamdulillah, they read Quran on a regular basis. Alhamdulillah, they fast on a regular basis. All these things, in my opinion, and I'm not an alim, a scholar, are preparation for the difficulties in life. We used to say that Ramadan is like spring training for Muslims. In other words, just like the baseball teams, they go to spring training they do wind sprints, they practice their batting. In order to function out there on the field, we Muslims, we turn it on their head by Allah. Allah ordered us to do this thing. And we focus on serving Allah, withholding from eating and drinking and relationships with our wives 29 to 30 days. When I taught the young men in prison, I told them that don't let anybody ever tell you that you're undisciplined. If you can hold yourself back from doing what's permissible or halal for 10, 12 hours for 29 or 30 days, you can do anything, subhanAllah. This is what I mean by put your Islam to work. So in this case, I was angry. People wanted to lash out at the police department. People wanted to lash out at white people. And I said, listen, this is not the time for us to talk. I imposed a 2-month ban on myself because I was so angry. Because we should never let our emotions during these times lead us, right? Because the reality is that when our beloved alayhi salatu went to Taif, right, to look for help, he was at his lowest ebb. This is during the year of woe, right? He lost his beloved Khadijah, may Allah be pleased with her. He lost his uncle, who was a protector for him. And you think this would be the time for him to lash out. But he's supposed to be our role model. So put your Islam to work. That's number one. Number two is that the largest group in the Muslim community, that's a really contiguous group, and it's pretty much so, is the African-American community. Even though the Daisy community is larger, but it comes, you call it Pakistani and Indians, same thing, or Bengali, the same thing. You might get a fight, right? So the point.
You learned the word
Yeah,
basic, right?
right. So the point is that if we want to understand how we misconstrue race in this country, we might want to talk and take a look at African Americans and the way they're portrayed, we are portrayed in the public square. And here's a book I recommend. It's called Disintegration, the Splintering of the Black Community. And the way I teach this, I say 40, 60, 25, 4. Black America doesn't live here anymore. 40, 60, 25, 4. Black America doesn't live anymore. That sounds weird, right? So 40 years before this book was published, the book was published in 2010, 60% of Black Americans lived at or near the poverty level. 40 years before the book was published, and this is based on census data. It's not based on opinion, right? 40 years before the book was published. So the book was published in 2010. What's 40 years before 2010? Mathematicians, what year was that?
1970.
No, yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, and so most Black families were at or near the poverty level. You fast forward to 2010, that number drops to 25%. This is a dramatic change in the social cultural makeup of the African American community. Doesn't mean that racism has gone away. It does mean that the tenor and the notions about what African Americans are about is a little different. Now the largest group of African Americans are people like me who belong to that group now 50 years ago, right? My family that I grew up in was at or near the poverty level. And alhamdulillah, I've, went to school, went to Hampton University, and went to graduate school, became a professor, and I'm in the middle class. That's the largest group of African Americans today. If you listen to the way people talk in politics and listen to the way African Americans talk, you'd think that most of us were poor. There are a lot of, by the way, there are a lot of black millionaires these days. They just keep their head down, right? So he argues in the first chapter of the book, the first chapter of his book, and he writes for the Washington Post, Eugene Robinson, he argues that black America doesn't live anymore. Instead of one black America, there are four. Instead of one, there are four. One is that group of people who are very poor, that's now 25%. They used to be 60%, they're now 25%, right? But they're finding it harder and harder to get out of poverty. Two is the group of the people I talked about before, the larger group, the so-called middle class people. And three are the people that he calls the transcendents, the Obamas, the Oprah Winfreys, and the people who run Fortune 500 companies. A while ago, the head of McDonald's was black. I don't know if it's still black. The head of American Express was black. But you don't see their names in the news. When I was small, we only had one or two people like that, and everybody knew them, but we don't know it. He calls them the transcendent, that they have so much money and power that even white folks have to genuflect, right? And so that's the third one. And then the fourth one is related to many people in this audience. The fourth one part of the fourth one is comes from mixed race marriages. Up until 1963, it was against the law for whites and blacks to marry in the state of Virginia. 1963 is not that long ago. Up until 1963, the Supreme Court case is Loving versus Virginia. And they were named Loving, that's really, and they weren't civil rights activists, they were just a white man and a black woman who loved each other, who wanted to get married. That was it. And the state locked them up. And so since the Supreme Court made that illegal, what we're finding is that there's a group of people, like Barack Obama, for instance, right? Like Kamala Harris, right, for instance, who are called black, right? Because people say our first black president was Barack Obama, and maybe Kamala Harris would be our first black woman president. But they're really mixed race, right? They're really mixed race because both parents are not black. And in fact, both parents are not native to African American, right? Kamala Harris's father is from Jamaica, and Barack Obama's father is from Kenya. Why is this? One of the reasons it is that one of the results of the civil rights movement is that the racist immigration laws were changed in 1965, right? Because before 1965, it favored white Europeans. And after 1965, those racist quotas were done away with, and some of you came to the United States from South Asia, from Africa, from the Caribbean, a large influx. And so many of them who came from Africa and come from the Caribbean look like me, but they don't have the same social cultural history as my people do in the United States. And so he calls that one half of the emergent. They're not exactly like black people were 50 or 60 years ago, but they look like me, right? So what you're seeing is a dynamic that is making the black community not be one, but it's split into four areas. So what does this mean? First of all, that if you're working with any community, African American community in this respect, you should try to learn something about the community that's based on fact but not based on stereotypes, right?
So what percentage is middle class?
The middle class, I think, I've forgotten that percentage. I think it's around 50% at this point. Yeah, yeah. But I'll double check it, right, before the night is over, because I forgot the number. They're the largest group right now. We're the largest group, right? So what happens is that oftentimes communities will look to black people always as people who are helpless, right, and always a need, but they won't come to somebody like me who has maybe $2 more and ask for a donation. You see, there's a psychology there. They assume because you're black that you're poor and that you don't have the skills and the wherewithal to help the community. So this is how it actually impacts how we navigate identities in the Muslim American community. Then there was September 11, 2001. How many people remember where you were September 11, 2001? Yeah. Yeah, subhanAllah. Yeah. Yeah, I was working at Manhattanville College again, and I could literally see that Manhattanville College is about 30 miles from New York City. And so my office is on the 4th floor of the administration building. I could see the Twin Towers. On a clear day, I could see the Twin Towers. I want to tell you, I was stunned, right? I was stunned by this because, you know, and yes.
The September 11, I'm going to New York. I'm going the next day. I'm going there.
Oh,
I'm
you,
going to look and smell the floor, only the meat are very bad.
you went there on the 12th.
I'm in there on the 12th.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going there, very bad, pero the thing, no, the 11, I'm in home ready for go work in Virginia. And I look at the TV and I say, wow, this is look like movie.
Yeah.
And I see the building and coming the airplane and but I listen the Pentagon,
Yeah.
very strong. The other airplane in Pentagon, very
Three-
strong. I'm feeling in the body.
3,000 people, 3 sites, the Pentagon, Pennsylvania, led to 500,000 Muslim deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan, in America's longest running war. Right? I was one of those people who was in denial. I call it an ID moment, a denial moment, because I was going around speaking. And I said nothing has changed, but reality, post 9/11, whole communities in New York were cleared out, right? Left. FBI scooped them up, deported them. You didn't know. You'd walk into communities in New York, and people, it would be ghost towns. My point is that this, like other events in the international sphere, like the Iranian hostage takeover, the Arab oil embargo, people who are old enough to remember these kinds of things, changed the way that we are seen, right? Our identity on the world scene. And so my point is that we can't deny that these things change. As a matter of fact, we ought to do something about